It was 2:37 in the morning when Alexander Grayson, one of the wealthiest men in the city, sat in the nursery of his penthouse, staring blankly at the soft glow of the nightlight. His 3-year-old son, Oliver, was crying again. Not the usual sleepy whimpers, but the kind of deep, heart-twisting sobs that echoed through the empty halls of a house that once felt alive. Another nanny had quit that night, the 12th in just 5 months. She had left in tears, mumbling something about a child who won't let anyone near him, and a father who doesn't know how to love anymore. Her words stung, but Alexander said nothing. He just stood there in the doorway as the elevator doors closed, clutching the silence that returned like an unwelcome ghost. He had once been a man everyone admired, a self-made millionaire in his mid-30s, owner of a thriving investment firm, featured in magazines and on talk shows. He had everything: the career, the home, the cars, the beautiful wife, Emma. But when a car accident took her life 2 years ago, it also took the warmth from his soul. Now, money couldn't buy him peace. It couldn't buy him sleep. And it certainly couldn't buy the love of a son who barely looked at him anymore. The agency had almost stopped answering his calls. But one morning, after yet another desperate plea, they agreed to send one last nanny. "She's different," they said cautiously. "Not as experienced, but she has a gift with children." Alexander didn't care anymore. He just wanted someone who could help Oliver smile again. That afternoon, the doorbell rang. Standing there was a young woman in her mid-20s, dressed simply but with kind eyes that carried a strange calmness. "Mr. Grayson, I'm Clara," she said softly. "I'm here about the position." He almost dismissed her on the spot. She was nothing like the polished professionals who had come before her. No crisp suit, no binder full of references, just a quiet confidence and a warmth that felt unsettlingly human. Still, he stepped aside and let her in. The first day was a disaster. Oliver refused to look at her, throwing toys and hiding under his bed. Alexander, watching from the doorway, sighed. "You can go," he muttered. "He doesn't take to people." But Clara didn't move. She knelt down near the bed, her voice gentle but firm. "That's okay. I'll wait right here until you're ready, Oliver." Hours passed, and she stayed on the floor, humming softly to herself. Alexander left, convinced she'd quit before sunset. When he returned that evening, he froze. Oliver was asleep, peacefully, head resting on Clara's lap, tiny fingers curled around hers. For the first time in months, the boy's face wasn't twisted with sadness. Alexander's throat tightened. "How did you do that?" he asked quietly. She looked up at him and smiled. "Sometimes, children don't need to be managed. They just need to be understood." Days turned into weeks, and for the first time since Emma's death, laughter began to echo through the penthouse again. Clara didn't follow strict routines or fancy parenting techniques. She let Oliver paint on the walls of his playroom, build forts in the living room, and dance barefoot in puddles on the balcony after rain. She spoke to him like he mattered, as if his tiny emotions were as real and important as anyone else's. Alexander would often find himself watching them from a distance, her gentle patience, the way she made his son's fears melt away. Something in him began to shift, though he didn't understand it yet. He found himself lingering longer in the kitchen when she made breakfast, offering coffee or asking about her day. He started to notice things: how she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear when she was nervous, how her laughter filled the silence that used to suffocate the house. And slowly, without realizing it, Alexander began to feel alive again. But life has a cruel way of testing new beginnings. One evening, Clara received a call that changed everything. Alexander found her sitting on the steps outside, face pale, tears streaming down her cheeks. "What happened?" he asked, alarmed. "My father," she whispered. "He's in the hospital. They said he might not make it." Without hesitation, Alexander arranged a private car to take her to her hometown, a small village hours away. "Go," he said. "Stay as long as you need." But Oliver screamed when she tried to leave. "Don't go, Clara. Please. He clung to her leg, his little voice breaking. She hugged him tight, whispering through tears, I'll come back, I promise. The house felt hollow again. Days passed in a blur. Oliver refused to eat, refused to play, and cried himself to sleep each night. Alexander sat by his bedside, trying to soothe him, but every attempt only reminded him how much he'd failed before Clara came. And somewhere deep inside, he realized, he wasn't just missing her because she made Oliver happy. He was missing her because she had awakened something in him he thought was dead, hope. 2 weeks later, Clara returned. Exhausted, eyes red, but with a faint smile. Her father had passed, but she had come back, kept her promise. When Oliver saw her, he ran into her arms, sobbing. She held him close, whispering, See, I told you I'd come back. Alexander stood silently in the doorway, emotion swelling in his chest. When she looked up at him, something unspoken passed between them, a shared grief, a shared healing. Months went by, and the bond between the three of them grew stronger. Clara became more than a nanny, she became part of their family. But one evening, during a rare dinner together, Alexander finally said what had been haunting him. Clara, he began, his voice low, I know this job wasn't supposed to be forever. But I don't think I could manage without you now. Oliver, he needs you. And, honestly, I think I do too. She smiled sadly. Mr. Grayson, I was never here for the money. I stayed because you both needed someone to remind you how to love again. He looked at her, surprised. And what about you? What do you need? Her voice trembled. Maybe, the same thing. The following months unfolded like a slow sunrise. Oliver began preschool. He made friends, laughed louder, and no longer woke up crying for his mother. Alexander, too, changed. He started leaving work earlier, spending evenings reading bedtime stories instead of reviewing business reports. And more often than not, Clara would be there beside him, her presence a quiet comfort. One night, after Oliver had fallen asleep, they sat by the fireplace. The air was filled with the crackle of burning logs and the soft hum of a lullaby still lingering from upstairs. Alexander turned to her. Do you ever think about leaving? Starting over somewhere else? She hesitated. I used to. But now, this feels like home. He reached for her hand. Then stay. Not as Oliver's nanny, but as part of our family. Tears filled her eyes. Are you sure, Alexander? For the first time in years, he said, smiling, I'm absolutely sure. The news of their quiet engagement months later surprised everyone, but those who knew Alexander saw the transformation. He was no longer the cold, distant millionaire who hid behind his grief. He was a father again. A man again. Alive again. At the wedding, Oliver, now 5, stood proudly beside them, holding Clara's hand. Mommy, he said shyly as the guests laughed softly, are you happy? Clara knelt down, tears of joy glistening in her eyes. Yes, sweetheart, happier than I've ever been. Alexander looked at them both, and for a moment, he felt Emma's presence, gentle, approving. He knew she would have wanted this, for their son to be loved, and for him to find peace. Years later, Alexander often told their story to Oliver when he asked how they all became a family. He would smile and say, you see, sometimes life takes away everything you thought you needed, just to give you what you truly deserve. I fired 12 nannies, thinking I was protecting you, but the truth is, I was protecting my heart. And then one day, you fell asleep in her arms, and I realized, maybe it was time to wake up. Oliver always loved that part. Because even as a child, he understood that love doesn't always arrive in grand gestures, it comes quietly, like a lullaby that finally lets you rest after years of pain. Moral of the story, love has a way of finding those who've lost faith in it. Healing doesn't come from forgetting the past, it comes from letting someone hold you through it. And sometimes, the greatest miracles happen not when we're looking for them, but when we're finally ready to feel again.